Freeze! Drop the weapon now! This is your last warning! Don't move. Hands where I can see them. I'm complying, officer. Please, don't shoot.
The city was awake, but pretending not to be. Morning light slid along the faces of glass towers, thin and pale, as if unsure it was welcome. Automatic doors, side open and shut, for no one. Lobbies glowed with the disciplined warmth of money-polished stone floors. Brushed steel railings, potted trees that had never known wind. Security cameras pivoted in small, obedient arcs. They watched without blinking. They always did. The jogger moved through this corridor like a metronome. Shoes striking pavement, breath measured, shoulders loose, spine upright. He ran the same route most mornings, not because it was scenic, but because it was predictable. Predictability was its own form of safety. The sidewalks here were wide, uncluttered, maintained by invisible hands that erased graffiti before it dried. The street lights dimmed but did not turn off. They lingered, just in case. His shoes were gray, worn at the edges, the soles flattened by repetition. Each step landed cleanly. Hill roll, push. The sound echoed softly between buildings, swallowed and returned in pieces. He passed a bank with its lights already on, tellers preparing their smiles. He passed a law firm where the night cleaning crew was still inside, silhouettes moving behind tinted glass-like figures in an aquarium. He did not look at the cameras. He never did. The patrol car was parked at the curb, engine idling, a dark shape against the clean geometry of the street. Inside, the officer sat alone. The dashboard cast a blue-white glow across his face, flattening it, sharpening the angles. Coffee cooled in the cup holder. The radio murmured in low, constant fragments codes, locations, voices without bodies. He saw the jogger before the jogger saw him. Or rather, he noticed him. There was a difference. Noticing was an act shaped by training. Noticing meant posture, gait, proximity. Noticing meant cataloging without curiosity. The officer's eyes tracked the movement automatically. A figure running through a financial district before most offices opened. Dark clothing, hood down, hands empty, swinging in rhythm. The officer's foot shifted slightly on the brake. His shoulders tightened, almost imperceptibly. He leaned forward a fraction, as if the glass between him and the street had thickened. The jogger felt the gaze before he identified its source. It was not fear, not yet. It was pressure, the subtle awareness of being singled out in a space designed to erase individuality. He kept his pace. He kept his eyes forward. His breath remained steady. The patrol car door opened. The sound was precise, a mechanical click, a controlled release. The officer stepped out, boots meeting pavement with a dull finality. His uniform was immaculate, creases sharp, badge catching the light. The body camera sat square at his chest, a small red dot blinking to life. Hey, one word, not loud, not friendly, placed carefully in the space between them. The jogger slowed to a stop. He did not turn immediately. He let the last step settle, the echo fade. When he turned, he did so, fully, openly. His hands hung at his sides. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. His face was calm, composed by habit rather than ease. The officer's hand hovered near his holster. Not on it, near it, a practiced distance, measured in inches and doctrine. His stance widened slightly, weight distributed for balance. He scanned quickly waistband pockets, shoes. He noted the shoes again, running shoes. He noted the absence of a bag, a weapon, anything that could be named. What are you doing out here this early? The officer asked. The question was procedural. It carried no curiosity. It was a box to be checked. Running, the jogger said. Silence followed. It stretched, thin and deliberate. The city seemed to hold its breath with them. Somewhere above, a light flicked on in an office tower, one floor at a time, like a slow awakening eye. The officer nodded once, as if acknowledging a point that did not require agreement. His gaze lingered, searching for dissonance. Training filled the gaps where certainty should have been. Mind telling me where you're headed? The jogger named a street, a real one, close by. His voice did not rise. It did not fall. He had learned long ago that modulation could be misread as attitude. The officer's jaw tightened. His hands settled onto the grip of his gun. It was not a sudden movement. It was the culmination of many small ones, each justified by policy, by precedent, by stories told in locker rooms and briefing rooms. The gun came free of the holster with a soft, practiced sound. The officer raised it, arms extending, elbows locking, the barrel aligned with the jogger's chest. Time did not stop. It thinned. The jogger felt the shift before he fully registered the weapon. A tightening in his own body, instinct pressing against discipline. His heart accelerated, not wildly, but enough to notice. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, fingers spread. The gesture was careful, rehearsed by a lifetime of observation rather than instruction. I'm just running. He said again. The red dot on the body camera blinked, steadily, recording, preserving, interpreting. The officer's breathing was audible now, controlled but present. Inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. He kept the gun steady. He told himself this was caution, not fear. He told himself the protocol existed for a reason. Around them, the city continued its routines. A bus hissed to a stop at the corner. Empty. A delivery truck idled, its driver scrolling on his phone. Above, a drone of traffic began to build on the expressway. A distant, constant roar. "Do you have any ID on you?" the officer asked. The jogger nodded once. "In my pocket, don't move until I tell you." Another pause. The jogger stood with his hands raised, shoulders beginning to burn from the position. Sweat cooled on his skin. He stared past the officer's shoulder, at the reflection of himself in a glass facade, arms up, body still, framed by wealth and order. The officer watched him, waiting for a misstep, a tremor that would confirm the narrative already forming in his mind. The gun remained trained, unwavering. Finally, the officer lowered it, just slightly, enough to signal a decision had been made, though not resolved. Slowly, he said. The jogger reached for his pocket with deliberate care, every movement segmented, visible. He produced a wallet and held it out, 2 fingers, as if offering something fragile. The officer took it, eyes never leaving the jogger's face. He glanced at the ID, the name, the address. Something shifted, subtle but real. A recalibration, not relief, recognition. He handed the wallet back. "You can go," he said. The jogger took it, nodded once, and turned. He resumed his run, pace slightly altered, breath finding a new rhythm. He did not look back. The officer stood for a moment longer, gun now fully lowered. Before reholstering it, the click echoed louder than it should have. He returned to the car, closed the door, and sat. The red dot on the camera continued to blink. As the jogger disappeared down the street, swallowed by the geometry of the city, the morning resumed its careful unfolding. Lights brightened, doors opened, people arrived, unaware of the line that had briefly been drawn and erased. From above, the street looked clean and orderly. Another early hour, another routine exchange. The cameras kept watching, the city kept moving, and somewhere in its vast, polished body, moments like this passed seen, recorded, and filed away, or not at all, leaving no mark on the stone, only on the people who carried them forward. Police headquarters smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee, a controlled sterility that resisted intrusion. The building rose from the street in deliberate lines, concrete and glass, stacked with bureaucratic confidence. Inside, the morning moved on schedule. Elevators chimed. ID badges were scanned, clipped, unclipped, scanned again. The machinery of order warmed itself without urgency. The police chief entered through a side door, his reflection splitting and recombining in the glass. He did not hurry. He never hurried. His shoes were polished to a muted shine, practical, unremarkable. The badge on his belt caught the light as he walked, a brief flare of authority that faded with each step. He nodded to no one and everyone, a posture perfected over decades, accessible but distant, present but sealed. He had not yet been told the whole of it. He knew this by the way the building behaved, how people straightened as he passed, how conversations dimmed into murmurs, how eyes followed him and then looked away. Information had begun moving before permission was granted. It always did. A lieutenant fell into step beside him, tablet held close to his chest. "Morning, Chief, morning." There was a pause, calibrated. The lieutenant's grip tightened. The tablet's screen glowed faintly, a constellation of icons waiting to be opened. "There was an interaction," the lieutenant said. "Earlier, downtown corridor." The chief kept walking. Glass walls slid past on either side, revealing offices arranged like aquariums, desks aligned, chairs tucked in, people suspended in quiet concentration. The chief's reflection multiplied, fractured by angles and seams. "An interaction," he repeated. "Yes, sir." The word carried weight. Interaction suggested mutuality, a meeting of equals. It was the language of reports, not of reality. They reached the elevator. The doors closed with a soft, decisive sound. The lieutenant finally met the chief's eyes, just long enough to register permission. An officer drew his weapon. The elevator ascended. Numbers ticked upward, red and impartial. "Was anyone hurt?" "No, sir." The chief nodded once. The relief was immediate, but it did not settle. He had learned to distrust first impressions. The elevator opened onto the executive floor, quieter than the rest of the building. Carpet absorbing sound, light diffused to avoid glare. "Who was the subject?" the chief asked. The lieutenant hesitated, a fraction of a second too long. "That's part of why I wanted to brief you personally." They entered the chief's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, the grid unfolding in disciplined symmetry. The desk was clear, except for a leather folder and a small, unadorned lamp. The chief took his seat, folded his hands, and waited. The lieutenant placed the tablet on the desk and tapped the screen. A report opened. The cursor blinked at the top, impatient. "The subject is a black male," the lieutenant said, voice steady. "Mid-30s, jogging. No prior contact. No weapon." The chief watched the blinking cursor. He had always found it unsettling, the way it demanded continuation, as if silence itself were a failure. And the lieutenant scrolled. Names appeared, affiliations, a headshot, neutral background, professional expression. The chief leaned forward. For a moment, the office seemed to contract. The glass walls pressed in. The city outside blurred, reduced to light and motion without detail. The chief's breath caught, shallow and involuntary. He knew the name, not personally, not intimately, but he knew it in the way one knows the architecture of power by proximity, by repetition, by the quiet gravity it exerted. The jogger was not anonymous. He was adjacent to institutions the chief had spent his career navigating with care. Advisory boards, policy forums, donor lists. A man who belonged in rooms where decisions were made, even if he was not always allowed to speak first. "Who's the officer?" the chief asked. The lieutenant named him. A good record. No prior complaints that had stuck. Commendations for vigilance. The kind of officer the department liked to showcase. The chief leaned back. He clasped his hands tighter, knuckles whitening slightly. The horror arrived, not as a wave, but as a cold clarity. This was not just a mistake. It was a mirror. If that name had been different, the chief said slowly, when would I have heard about this? The lieutenant did not answer. Silence filled the room, thick and instructive. The chief stood and moved to the window. Below, the city continued its choreography, cars flowing, pedestrians threading through crosswalks, the illusion of order maintained by habit. He pressed his palm lightly against the glass. It was cool, unyielding. Who else knows? He asked. Internal Affairs has been notified. Legal is drafting language. Media hasn't picked it up yet. Yet, the chief repeated. He turned back to the desk. The tablet lay there, open, the blinking cursor, still waiting. The chief imagined the report as it would be written, careful phrasing, passive constructions. The gun described as having been displayed, the jogger as having been encountered. Language would do its work, sanding down edges, redistributing responsibility. Get me the body camera footage, he said, and the officer. Now, as the lieutenant left, the chief remained standing. He adjusted his badge, unclipped it, and set it on the desk. The metal made a small, definitive sound against the wood. For a moment, he simply looked at it. The symbol, stripped of context, was inert. The footage played on the wall screen, early light, empty streets, the jogger's steady pace. The moment the gun appeared, the chief felt something inside him, fracture, not surprise, recognition. He watched the scene unfold with clinical attention, noting posture, distance, the way the jogger's hands rose without instruction. The red dot blinked in the corner of the screen. When it ended, the room was very quiet. The city outside pressed on, unaware. The chief clipped his badge back on. The weight settled familiarly at his waist. He knew what would happen next. The meetings, the statements, the careful separation of individual action from institutional pattern. He also knew what would not happen. Some lines, once drawn, were protected by architecture, by glass walls and controlled access, by the quiet authority of buildings designed to endure scrutiny without changing shape. From the street, headquarters looked imposing, rational, fair, a monument to order. Inside, justice moved along prescribed paths, bending just enough to accommodate those who mattered. The chief stood alone in his office, framed by glass, and understood with unsettling clarity that the horror was not that a gun had been drawn, that it was that the system had only flinched when it recognized itself at the other end. The hearing room was designed to absorb sound and give nothing back. Wood paneling climbed the walls in dark, uninterrupted planes, polished to a muted sheen that reflected light without revealing fingerprints. Flags stood in rigid formation behind the dais, their fabric heavy, unmoving, as if stitched to the air itself. Microphones waited on the long table, black stems, identical heads angled upward with patient expectancy. The overhead lights were already on when the jogger entered. They did not flicker. They did not adjust. They cast a steady, indiscriminate glow that flattened faces and erased shadows. This was a room that refused drama. He took his seat at the table without instruction. His posture was straight, hands folded loosely before him, fingers interlaced. He wore a jacket he rarely used, dark and unadorned, its stiffness unfamiliar against his shoulders. The running shoes were gone, replaced by plain leather shoes that whispered against the floor. He placed his ID on the table, and then, after a brief consideration, slid it back into his pocket. Across from him, the officer sat rigidly, uniform pressed, boots aligned beneath the chair. His hands rested flat on the table, palms down, as if to demonstrate transparency. The body camera had been removed, but its absence was conspicuous. A missing eye. He stared straight ahead, jaw set. Expression neutralized into something that approximated professionalism. Between them, the microphones hummed softly. One of them was live, a small red light glowing steadily. No one noticed, or everyone did. The panel filed in. 3 members, spaced evenly behind the dais, each with a folder placed precisely before them. They did not look at the jogger as they sat. They did not look at the officer. They arranged papers, adjusted chairs, aligned pens. Procedure came first. This hearing is now in session, the chair said. The words settled into the room and stayed there. No echo, no resonance. The officer was called first. He rose, squared his shoulders, and approached the microphone. He did not clear his throat. He had practiced this. On the morning in question, he began. I observed an individual exhibiting behavior that, based on my training and experience, warranted further inquiry. The language flowed smoothly, pre-approved and well-worn, observed, exhibiting, warranted. Each word did its work, creating distance between action and consequence. He spoke of time of day, of location, of perceived anomalies. He spoke of safety. He spoke of protocol. I unholstered my service weapon as a precautionary measure, he said. At no point did I intend to discharge it. The microphone amplified his voice evenly. The red light remained on. The panel nodded occasionally, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. Pens moved. Notes were taken. The officer finished and returned to his seat, exhaling only once he was settled. The jogger was called next. He stood and walked to the microphone with measured steps. He did not adjust it. He did not lean in. He stood where he was, hands at his sides, and waited. Please state your name for the record. The chair said. He did. And describe what occurred from your perspective. The room seemed to contract. The jogger felt the weight of the lights, the expectation embedded in the silence. He could feel the system leaning forward, attentive but impatient. I was running, he said. An officer stopped me. He drew his gun. I complied with his instructions. He let me go. That was all. The chair tilted her head slightly. Can you elaborate? He paused. The pause stretched longer than was comfortable. He considered the room, the flags, the wood, the microphones that waited to translate his words into something manageable. There isn't much to add, he said. Silence followed. It was not empty. It pressed against the walls, settled into corners, crept beneath the table. One of the panel members shifted in his chair. A pen stopped moving. Did you feel threatened? The chair asked. The jogger looked at her directly for the first time. His expression was composed, but something firm had settled behind it. He had a gun pointed at me, he said. The microphone caught every syllable. The red light glowed. The chair nodded once. Thank you. You may return to your seat. He did. He folded his hands again, posture unchanged. From the corner of his eye, he could see the officer staring straight ahead. Jaw clenched tighter now. The hearing continued. Questions were asked. Clarifications requested. Each exchange was brief, contained. The jogger answered when addressed, never volunteering more than necessary. His restraint was noted, though not named. It would later be described as cooperation. But at one point, a microphone was left on too long. A panel member leaned toward another and whispered, optics. Before realizing, the word hung in the air, amplified, undeniable. No one addressed it. The chair cleared her throat, and the microphone was muted. The jogger felt something settle in his chest, not anger, not surprise, but recognition. This room did not reward expansion. It rewarded compression. Stories here were meant to be reduced to their most manageable form. When the hearing concluded, the chair thanked everyone for their participation. The words were formal, final. Chairs scraped softly as people stood. The panel filed out as they had entered. Folders tucked under arms. Expressions carefully neutral. The officer left first, guided by a superior hand at his elbow. The jogger remained seated for a moment longer. He watched the flags, still and heavy, and the lights, unwavering. He listened to the room empty itself. When he finally stood, the microphone nearest him was still live. The red light blinked patiently. He reached out and turned it off. The room went quiet in a different way then. Outside, the corridor waited, carpeted, fluorescent, lined with closed doors. The jogger walked through it alone, his footsteps soft, nearly absorbed by the floor. The building resumed its routines around him, unperturbed. From above, the hearing room returned to its resting state. Chairs aligned, microphones dormant, flags unmoved. Another inquiry completed, another record filed. Across the city, in rooms just like it, voices had been shaped by similar constraints. Taught the cost of expansion, the safety of silence. The architecture endured, patient and instructive, disciplining sound into compliance and calling it order. The conference room had no windows. Its walls were a neutral gray chosen to discourage memory. The table was long, lacquered, reflective enough to catch faces and distort them slightly. At one end, a screen glowed with muted television footage, news anchors speaking silently, their mouths shaping urgency without sound. At the other end, a stack of printed drafts sat neatly aligned, corners squared, waiting to be touched. Coffee cups ringed the table. Most were full, none were steaming. The police chief sat at the center, shoulders squared, hands resting flat on the table. His badge was clipped on, precisely positioned. He had learned long ago that symbols should never appear uncertain, even when the person wearing them was. Legal counsel spoke first. We need to be very clear about our framing, she said, fingers steepled. This was an isolated incident. The officer followed protocol as he understood it. There was no injury, no arrest. Public relations nodded, already making notes. The emphasis should be on review and transparency. We acknowledge concern without admitting fault. Around the table, senior officials shifted in their seats. Jackets were adjusted. Pens clicked open and closed. The language moved quickly now, efficient and practiced. Like a machine shifting into a higher gear. Optics are sensitive, someone said, given who the individual is. The jogger's name was not spoken. It did not need to be. His identity had been distilled into a category: high visibility, high risk. Proximity to power recalibrated the stakes. The chief listened. He watched the words accumulate, stack upon one another, forming a structure meant to contain rather than reveal. He could see the press release taking shape. Even before it was read aloud, Public Relations slid a draft across the table. "Just a starting point," she said. The chief picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive. He read silently. "The department takes all community interactions seriously. An internal review has been initiated. The safety of both officers and civilians remains our top priority." The jogger appeared once, described as an individual. The gun did not appear at all. It had been transformed into a service weapon and then further softened into equipment. "Where is he in this?" the chief asked. The room paused. The question landed awkwardly, not hostile but inconvenient. "He's not alleging misconduct," legal counsel said carefully. "At least not formally." The chief looked up. He sat across from an officer who pointed a gun at him. "That's not nothing." "No," counsel agreed. "But from a liability standpoint, I'm not asking about liability," the chief said. Silence followed. It was brief, but it carried weight. Someone cleared their throat. The muted television screen showed a graphic police incident flashing in bold letters. Though no one could hear the accompanying commentary. Public Relations leaned forward. "Chief, with respect, the focus needs to be on institutional stability. If we center his experience too much, we invite a broader narrative, pattern, bias." She did not need to finish the thought. The word pattern hung there, radioactive. The chief set the draft down. He felt the fracture widen, slow and deliberate. Truth pressed against the boundaries of strategy, and the boundaries held firm. "What about the officer?" he asked. "Administrative leave, pending review," legal counsel said. "Standard procedure." Standard, another word that did work. "In the body camera footage?" the chief asked. "Not released at this time," PR said. "We can cite ongoing review." The chief nodded. He had expected this. Still, something in him resisted the ease with which the jogger's dignity had become negotiable. A variable in a risk assessment. He imagined the jogger back on the street, running again, carrying the weight of that morning in his body. He imagined the officer at home, replaying the moment, or not. He imagined the city absorbing it all, indifferent and intact. "We'll need to reach out to him," PR said. A gesture quietly expressed concern. "Concern," the chief repeated. "Yes, emphasize our commitment to community trust. And if he doesn't want to be quiet?" the chief asked. The question was met with a collective stillness. Coffee cups sat untouched. The air felt stale, recycled too many times. "Then we adjust," legal counsel said, "but we don't lead with that assumption." The chief leaned back. He looked at the muted screen again. Another anchor had appeared, another headline. The story was already escaping the room, taking on a life of its own. He thought of the hearing room, the way the microphones waited, the way silence had been mistaken for compliance. He thought of the gun, how easily it had been reframed as equipment, as policy made metal. "All right," he said finally. The word carried finality. The room exhaled, subtly. Pens moved again. The draft was retrieved, annotated, refined. As the meeting adjourned, chairs scraped softly against the floor. People gathered their materials, their expressions settling back into professional neutrality. The machine slowed but did not stop. The chief remained seated for a moment longer. He reached for a coffee cup, lifted it, and then set it back down untouched. He stood, straightened his jacket, and left the room. The corridor outside was bright, fluorescent lights humming steadily. Staff moved past him, nodding, unaware of the calculations that had just been completed behind closed doors. From above, the process was seamless. Language absorbed impact. Procedure redistributed responsibility. Human consequence was sanded down until it fit neatly into official memory. The institution stood firm, protected by its own careful design, while somewhere beneath its polished surface, something essential had been contended and diminished. The street looked the same. Morning returned with its careful light, sliding along glass and steel, illuminating corners that had not earned attention the day before. The city did not memorialize moments like these. It absorbed them, filed them into muscle memory, and moved on. The jogger ran again. He wore the same shoes, gray, worn thin at the edges. The soles had not recovered their shape. They never did. Each step landed with the same measured cadence, heel to toe to push, the body remembering what the mind could not forget. His route was unchanged. Predictability still felt like safety, even if it no longer promised it. Cameras watched him pass. They pivoted slightly, obedient, indifferent. The red dots did not blink this time, or if they did, he did not look to see. He had learned what looking cost. He felt different in his body now. Not weaker, not slower, altered. A vigilance had settled beneath the rhythm. A low, constant hum. His shoulders stayed looser than they felt. His hands remained visible, even while running. He did not think about it. Thinking was too slow. This was knowledge that lived in the muscles. A flag hung outside a municipal building ahead, lowered to half-staff. It marked something else, another loss. Another official grief, but it caught his eye all the same. Fabric moved gently in the morning air, the only thing on the street that seemed to acknowledge weight. Inside police headquarters, the chief stood alone, in his office, the city spread out beneath him, orderly and vast. He had read the final report that morning. It was clean, thorough. It concluded what it had been designed to conclude. The officer remained on duty, with a note in his file, language softened by context. Additional training recommended. The department reaffirmed its commitment to community trust. The chief turned the pages slowly. As if speed might imply agreement, he stopped at the section labeled Outcome. The word felt insufficient. It suggested closure where there was none. His badge rested on the desk, unclipped. He had begun doing that more often, removing it when he was alone, as if the metal needed rest. He looked at it now, at the way it caught the light even when it lay still. There would be no press conference today. The story had flared and then dimmed, eclipsed by newer urgencies. The jogger's name had appeared briefly in headlines, then disappeared into the scroll. The footage had not been released. It remained archived, preserved in silence. The chief knew what had been lost could not be recovered by procedure. He also knew the building behind him would endure. It always did. Back on the street, the jogger slowed as he approached the place where it had happened. The curb, the stretch of sidewalk between a bank and a law firm. Nothing marked it, no plaque, no scar. He did not stop. He did not need to. The location lived in him now, mapped precisely. A patrol car passed, moving in the opposite direction. He felt the familiar tightening, brief but real. The car did not slow. It disappeared into traffic, indistinguishable from the rest. The officer inside wore a body camera. At the end of his shift, he would turn it off, the red dot extinguishing with a soft, definitive click. The footage would be uploaded, categorized, stored. Another day recorded, another day reduced to data. The jogger finished his run where he always did. At the edge of a small park tucked between buildings. He slowed to a walk, breath steadying, sweat cooling. He stretched, deliberate, attentive to his body. He tied and retied a shoe that had come loose, fingers lingering on the frayed lace. He stood for a moment, watching the city fill in around him. People arrived. Doors opened. The illusion of neutrality resumed its work. Inside headquarters. The chief clipped his badge back on. The weight settled, familiar and final. He straightened his jacket and left his office. Stepping into the corridor where the machinery of the day waited. From above, the city looked complete. Systems functioned. Order held. The moment that had briefly disrupted the surface had been smoothed over, absorbed into the structure. What remained visible was what always did. Streets, cameras, flags, badges. What remained unseen carried on in bodies and silences, in altered rhythms and unspoken knowledge. The jogger ran on. The institution stood, and between them, the city continued according some things, forgetting others, leaving the rest to persist quietly, unchanged and undeniable.